Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Ironbark Podcast. I am your host, Epion, and today is going to be an episode dedicated to Peanut the Squirrel and Fred the Raccoon. I'm really going to try to deep dive into this the best that I can. Mark Longo, if you're listening to this, I've sent you an email. I wanted to reach out to you. I wanted to get the full story, start to finish, on what exactly happened. You're talking to a lot of people in media about it. They don't really exactly know what type of questions to ask because they're not too wildlife savvy with how that whole thing unfolds. I've been discussing it and talking to it about it with other people. There's a lot of unanswered questions. We want to kind of get to the bottom of everything that happened. So I'm just going to start my deep dive now and kind of give you my full opinion. And then it's going to go into a lot of speculation because I don't have a lot of answers. So I'll start by just kind of reading my post on X because it's pretty much all encompassing and comprehensive. Not entirely though, I have to go on a bit more after it. Extremely sad and disheartened to hear the news about the euthanization of Peanut the Squirrel and Fred the Raccoon. As a nature and wildlife content creator on this platform, I'm going to give you my full opinion. Firstly, I don't believe that the animal should have been euthanized. Here's my full breakdown. Even if there is some sort of law prohibiting the ownership or domestication of wildlife, there should have been a more reasonable resolution. For example, if there was some sort of concern or complaint surrounding the animals, they first should have been relocated to an animal sanctuary or rehabilitation facility temporarily, just to get to the bottom of things and to allow for any court legal challenges to occur. This also would have given the owner the ability to apply for any appropriate permits or licenses if required, which would essentially function as an injunction of sorts. So, since posting this, it's come to my understanding that he actually owned a wildlife sanctuary. He used the money that he raised from social media through Peanut to open his own wildlife sanctuary and rehabilitation center. Now, the questions I would want to ask Mark would be, when his house was raided, is his house also on the sanctuary property? Is it like a rural property? Is his home separate from the sanctuary? Now, I've watched a couple of his interviews. It seems to sound like his house was at a sanctuary and a rural property because it sounded like he had horses and other things. So, if that place is a sanctuary and it was raided, it seems kind of weird that they wanted to take an animal from a wildlife sanctuary. It doesn't really make sense. So my questions would be, was there any kind of other complaint that you were aware of going into that before this happened? Yeah. So, and was the facility like properly licensed, permit? It seems like it was. According to his website, he has like an official like registration number, nonprofit type of thing. So it's kind of weird. So I'm going to continue reading the post now. Next, an investigation should have been conducted to determine if the owners were actually abusing or harming the animals in some capacity, or if the complaint was about an attack or something along those lines, or suspicion of rabies or something like that. There should have still been an investigation conducted. And then I put, note, some people are of the opinion or perspective that simply owning or domesticating wildlife is abusive. So this is a perspective in the wildlife world. I meet these people all the time. They're good people generally. And their opinion is that by taking an animal out of the wildlife, you're kind of removing its ability to reproduce, live its purposeful life in a meaningful capacity. Now, there are some wildlife when you rescue them, such as like baby squirrels, who will just die off. Or, you know, say there were nuisance animals and they were rescued from extermination, that type of thing. They'll become acclimated to people. They'll become dependent on people. They'll lose their ability to forage, scavenge, hunt, hide from predators, defend themselves, hibernate properly. All these types of reproduce properly. So effectively, by releasing them back into the wild, it's considered cruel to some extent. So that's kind of where the compromise is where, well, okay, owning a wild animal might be cruel in your opinion, but there are outstanding or special circumstances where it does become appropriate. So I just want to kind of cover that base there. And they should be able to live out their life in a wildlife sanctuary where their natural habitat is replicated as greatly as possible. So their enrichment's very good and they have very large enclosures, which is much different than a zoo, by the way, because it's not there for like be a petting zoo for people to come in and look at them. They're supposed to be kind of living their life in a wild capacity. So I'll continue reading. However, even if it was found to be prohibited by law or in some way abusive, the rational, logical approach to rescuing this animal from illegal ownership wouldn't be to destroy or euthanize the animal, as you're not rescuing an animal if you're simply going to, kill it afterwards. So here's another thing that's come to my attention since posting this. Apparently the animals were put down because during the apprehension of them, they had bit some of the officers involved. Most standard protocols for wildlife enforcement is if you're bit by an animal, that animal has to be tested for rabies. The most fast and efficient way to test an animal for rabies is to examine brain matter. And the only way to examine brain matter is to first euthanize the animal, then, sample its brain matter. You could also put them into quarantine for 10 days, but here's kind of like the skinny on that. If the officer is going to wait 10 days, he would still need to take a cocktail treatment of medication as a precaution not to be infected with rabies. That cocktail of meds is extremely powerful and it's kind of bad to take. Like it makes you feel like crap. It runs you down. It's a bunch of drugs and chemicals. You don't really necessarily want to do it or take it unless, if it's avoidable, you generally want to avoid it unless rabies would be a much worse outcome. So then you would take it in that case if you knew for certain you're going to get rabies. And then you also, when you go home at night, you would be a potential risk or hazard to your family and loved ones, as maybe you could pass it on to them. So I understand that perspective, and I know a lot of you listening won't really agree with that, but you understand that there's sort of like these protocols in place and why they exist. Now, the criticism you could have here is, okay, if these are wildlife enforcement officers, why weren't they handling the animal better? The proper like safety equipment, gloves, thick gloves, extendo sticks with like the rope on it like animal control has for dogs, proper cages and stuff like that. Basically an indirect contact and handling of the animal. Why didn't they use the owner, who would probably have a better opportunity at handling that animal and less likely to be bit? How come they didn't like give them an opportunity to compliantly surrender the animal? A lot of these things are unknown, and these are questions I would want to ask Mark. Like, was this opportunity afforded to you? Was everything just by brute force? Was it like you don't get to ask questions, just be quiet, this is what's happening? Was there any kind of malicious intent on part of the animal control people where they didn't care if the animal bit them and they're like, well, if it bites me, it's getting put down? Like, I don't want to put that out there, but there are malicious people out there, right, that might have that kind of mentality. And I'm not saying they did. They probably didn't. They're probably just innocent, hardworking people that were just following the protocols of the law and, the rules and regulations. Okay, where did I leave off? Next, an investigation should have been conducted to determine if the owners were actually abusing or harming the animals in some capacity. Note, some people are of the opinion, okay, yeah, I already read that. So if there was some sort of allegation of abuse or here's another scenario that's being thrown around out there. So I was defending Mark Longo and the Squirrel adamantly in a space, and I actually got pushback from people, and they gave me some interesting perspective. They said, you're only hearing this guy's side of the story. He's a social media influencer on Instagram and TikTok. He's only going to show the positive stuff in his life, and it's going to be very curated to look like he's in a positive light, which he could be, but also there could be like a dark side that you don't see. which I doubt, but it's possible. So I'm going to put it all out there because I want it to be a full, comprehensive opinion. Now, there's a chance that perhaps he was asked to comply with a certain amount of regulations, expectations, laws, rules, permits, all that stuff. And I think he would have. He's a successful content creator. He's well funded and supported, lots of donations. There's no reason why he wouldn't be able to do that financially. He doesn't strike me as a type of person who wouldn't want to do it on principle. It looks like he would want to do everything by the book. He seems like a generally nice guy, so I'm not saying this is the case. But in the interest of full comprehension and getting to the bottom of things, these are the kind of things I would ask just to get rid of any sort of questioning or disillusions or accusations, etc. So what if he was long time standing, not in compliance with this stuff? He was given plenty of opportunities, and then eventually, because he just wouldn't comply, like giving these animals vaccinations, this and that, inspections, they were just like, okay, we're coming in to take the animal. We've told you enough times, and he had some sort of like on principle grounds, fine, then come and take it type of thing. And that probably didn't happen, but in the interest of full speculation and thinking way outside the box, because when I look at this, I'm only getting one side of the story. It seems like a pretty bad abuse of power if the government just came in there, or enforcement just came in there, took the animals, didn't have any sort of investigation, didn't have any sort of like opportunities for the person to comply willingly, and just went straight to force. That seems a bit like heavy-handed, which it could have been. But if we were to speculate in defense of them, like play devil's advocate, for example, is there a way where they didn't really do anything that wrong and it just was a really terrible outcome? So I'm just putting it out there, something for you guys to mull on and think about. Don't get all mad at me, okay? Okay, don't get mad at me. I know we love the squirrel. I love the squirrel. I wish these animals were not euthanized. Okay. So, however, even if it was found to be prohibited by law in some way, the rational and logic approach to rescuing an animal from illegal ownership wouldn't be to destroy or euthanize the animal, as you're not... okay, I already said that. The reasonable approach would be to have an animal live out the rest of its life in a wildlife sanctuary rehabilitation facility, which I'm absolutely positive that many, if not all, sanctuaries and rehabs would have taken these animals due to their internet celebrity status. So I wrote this before I knew he had a sanctuary. Knowing now that he had a sanctuary and it was well funded, I don't see reason why that animal couldn't live there. My question would be, is your home separate from the rehabilitation property? And was your home invaded and not the sanctuary property type of thing? I think it's all the same place based off the videos I saw and about him talking about the horses and stuff like that. Now, let's say his place wasn't in good standing or something, or it couldn't stay there for whatever reason, whatever breach jurisdiction. Maybe the zoning of the place wasn't supposed to be, it's not capable of being a place like that. There would be ample number of places that would take it, especially when you explain what's associated and affiliated with this animal, because outgoing donations and all that stuff would flood those places, especially after all the social media coverage that this thing has gotten. Those places would know, we're going to get tons of donations. It's going to keep this squirrel happy. Plus, there's going to be so many donations that it's going to help all the wildlife in this facility, and it's going to be an overall win. So you're going to help a bunch of animals, you're going to help that facility, you're going to help that squirrel. So that, to me, seems like the type of thing. Now, obviously, these facilities would have to do a good PR and say, we're taking this animal so it doesn't get destroyed, because obviously they'll look like the bad guys just taking away somebody's pet squirrel. So you'd have to cover all those bases, right? On the surface, the animals don't appear to me to look like they were suffering or being abused. They appeared healthy and happy. So they didn't look malnourished. They didn't look stressed. They didn't look, like they were suffering in any way. It's hard to determine the happiness of an animal, right? We can't live their experience, so we'll never really know. But generally, looking at it, you can't see its rib cages. They don't look like they're like hairs falling out, that type of thing. And that squirrel lived with him for 7 years. Safe to say, like, if that animal was suffering, you would have noticed signs by now. There are circumstances and jurisdictions that allow for citizens to care for wildlife. These have varying degrees of requirements, such as certification, permits, and licenses. I'm sure that after a review of the case, it would have been deemed appropriate for Mark Longo to continue to care for Peanut and Fred, at least in most jurisdictions. In conclusion, you're not saving wildlife from alleged abusive ownership if your response to saving them is eradicating the animals after. This makes zero sense and is not an appropriate response or best practice to dealing with this type of situation. My thoughts and prayers are with Mark and his wife. I know humans can form extremely strong bonds with animals and care for the animals they care for, and the loss of these animals can feel absolutely tragic and devastating. I can't imagine having your best friend and companions taken from you like this. And that's exactly it. You're adding kind of like the loss of an animal. When it happens naturally, it's really sad, but at least there's like a silver lining there. When it's taken from you, there's a whole other depth of wrongness to it, which, really would irk someone, and they would want to seek justice, some type of explanation, right? My theory going into this, okay, so there's basically 3 types of outcomes. Either unbeknownst to us, the owner was very terrible owner and wasn't in compliance after numerous notifications and, asked to complies and this sort of thing. Option number 2, the enforcement was just very heavy-handed, callous, wasn't well informed. They didn't really deal with the situation. They didn't investigate it much. Option number 3, which kind of ties into option number 2, was that this social media star, like many YouTube celebrities or e-celebs, was essentially the equivalent of being swatted, which is very common for online streamers and video game players, but with animal enforcement. And some sort of complaint was made that wasn't true. Like, he's like, oh, I've been attacked by rabid squirrels and something, and you need to go in there and get that animal right away, this and that. So law enforcement felt like maybe there was some sort of urgent need to go in, and that was why there was such a abrupt appearing heavy-handed use of force. And then ultimately they were duped. Now, this is something law enforcement agencies need to be conscious of. And it's kind of hard to do an investigation when there's an appearance of sudden need to respond. That type of thing. So the people who do that, I would say, are exceptionally evil, because that could result in the death of people, animals. It's not really a joke. Like, it's kind of fucked up, actually, if you think about it. And I think the people that do it are like just teenagers that are really good with computers, and they don't really have like a totality of understanding. They think it's all just like a big joke type of thing. And then here you have an instance where, maybe that swatter didn't really know about the bite protocols and would result in the euthanasia or destruction of the animals. So, and I'm not defending it, obviously, but kids don't fucking think sometimes, and then it ends up in stupid stuff like this. I don't know. It's really disheartening to see something like this. I'm seeing a lot of like attempts at like capitalizing on this politically. I'm not entirely sure if this is like a political thing. These might be standard practices for this type of stuff through different political leaderships for years, probably, right? Like probably through Republican and Democrats. So trying to say like this is like a Republican issue or a Democrat issue, it doesn't really jive well with me. What it does shine a light on is maybe that the policy and current procedures for this type of stuff is outdated, needs a better look at. You need to take a better look at, e-celeb swatting policy and procedure. Maybe like some sort of registry for these types of people. So when they pull up their names and locations, they can go, oh, okay. There's still potential that there could be a SWAT here, but also maybe there's also like a false allegation or just, trolling to the extreme. I think I got out everything I pretty much want to say about it. it seems like a pretty devastating thing. My thoughts and prayers are with the owner. I can't imagine how devastating that stuff is. Boy. I don't know. I'm leaning towards more of the theory that it was like a SWAT prank, and it went horribly wrong. Because I don't know, there is a chance that the government or, the enforcement acted heavy-handedly. That's a possibility. And then there's like maybe like a very slim chance that this guy was actually secretly like a slime ball, but I doubt it. I highly doubt that. You probably will doubt that too. But I have to, in the interest of fairness and complete and total speculation, I got to throw it out there, and I'm sorry for doing that. But I'm covering all my bases. I'm trying not to be biased as possible, right? And you've listened to this, so you know what I'm saying. And I think when I say maybe it was like a swatting, I think a lot of you go, oh, fuck. Yeah, maybe it was. Because seeing a heavy-handed response like that probably doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Unless people have had similar experiences and they think, yeah, it happened to me, it could happen to him. But generally, I don't think that's 100% always the case, but you always have a couple of bad apples. That's an expression, right? It's interesting. Time will tell. Mark, if you listen to this, I hope you reach out to me. I sent you an email. I'm on X. I don't know if you're exclusive to Instagram through like some sort of deal. But I'd love to talk to you on X Spaces, really get it all out there, to have like a full and total comprehensive understanding of the stuff. Oh, another thing, going back to the rabies stuff. Most people who work in wildlife sanctuaries and rehabs usually have to vaccinate them for rabies. And with raccoons and squirrels and stuff, you can actually do that orally. They just can eat stuff. People who handle them, like volunteers and stuff like that, depending on the jurisdiction, and I'm pretty sure this would be the case for New York, even the handlers, like people, especially if you're handling coyotes and stuff, you have to have your vaccinations up to date. Now, I don't know if they could have pulled the vaccination records from the squirrel to sort of alleviate their concern. Wildlife enforcement officials would be like, well, they might say, well, how can you trust these? How do you know they're not forged or doctored or this and that? Now, if it came from an accredited veterinarian, let's say the animal's microchipped or something like that, DNA'd, you could verify it that way. Now, if they went back and checked, that's a whole different thing. Maybe that's not good enough. It doesn't constitute being good enough, because these people also deal with a lot of animal abusers who might do that kind of stuff. So they probably just say, well, even if he has a record, we don't know if it's valid. We can't verify it, that type of thing. We have to err on the absolute highest side of caution, and the test must be done. But I feel like if you looked at a lot of the background, it's like, okay, social media star, daily uploads of the squirrel. The squirrel's not showing any signs of rabies or disease. We have recent videos documenting it leading up to this point. We have a veterinarian record. And yes, wildlife do get veterinarian checks at a wildlife sanctuary. Could that have helped alleviate the concern for rabies? I don't even know if the animals were euthanized because of that, but that would only be the most logical indication. There was an indication that the squirrel bit someone. There was no indication that the raccoon did in any of the articles, but maybe the raccoon did as well, or maybe the raccoon was housed close to the squirrel, so then they were thinking, okay, well, if the squirrel has it, then it has it. We have to check them both. Maybe they passed it to each other. Now, there's a lot of criticisms because there's never really been a case of squirrel to human rabies, passing it on. So that's like another thing. These enforcement officers, they're supposed to have their vaccines for that kind of stuff as well. So there's a lot of criticisms going back and forth on this argument, right, in this debate. It gets kind of crazy. It gets kind of out of hand here, right? Like everyone just keeps speculating. I would love to have a sit down with someone involved in this and kind of really hash it out and get it all out. What else I don't want to say about the rabies stuff? Oh, so it's important. So here's the thing. If a human contracts rabies, once it gets to your central nervous system, it's 100% deadly. It's 100% fatal. That's why it's so important. And that's why there's such like an officer safety concern involving it. There's a, and that's why it's so extreme, just so everyone knows. Even though you have all these sort of like other factors, there's never been a proven case of squirrel to human transmission. There's never been, the employees are supposed to be vaccinated. The sanctuary guys that own it, the animals are supposed to be vaccinated. All that's, even with all those precautions in place and all those suppostas, because it's 100% fatal once it hits your central nervous system. That's the precaution for it. Anyway, folks, I don't know. I feel like it's a bad situation. There was maybe some bad decisions made. Ended in tragedy, essentially. It's blown up. Elon Musk is talking about it. There's probably going to be inquiries. There's probably going to be investigations. We're probably going to hear more about it, especially if the owner pursues justice. And if he pursues it diligently and hard, we'll get the answer to everything, especially if there's a court proceeding. Yeah. Very bad situation. Could have gone better. I'm leaning towards the SWAT type of thing with like a big, massive false allegation that led to like an appropriate response based off the information they had. But unfortunately, hopefully if this is the case, hopefully it shines some light on that and people are able to make it safer for the people that are victims of this type of stuff. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. That's all I gotta say. Don't hate me. I'm Team Squirrel. I'm Team Keep them alive. I'm Team Safety. I don't want to see humans injured. I don't want to see humans get rabies. I don't want to see people's families impacted. I don't want to see wildlife die. I don't want to see people losing their companions and their friends. It's a fucking terrible situation. It's a terrible situation. I'm trying to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but in a situation like this, there has to be a villain, and I'm not sure who that villain is. It could have been, it's one of the three. It's the government, the owner, or a mystery person who like swatted them. And if you want to give a benefit of the doubt to both those people, like the government, like the law enforcement officers and the owner, it kind of seems to make sense that it's like, oh fuck, there is like a mysterious like boogeyman, like evildoer who just like phoned it in, like some crazy shit. Which seems to be in line kind of with the interviews I've seen, right? He's like, some random complaint, I never heard anything about it before, it just came out of nowhere, which seems to coincide with a lot of the SWAT stuff. So I'll leave it to you guys to speculate. Hopefully you leave a comment. Maybe I'll put a poll up with this on Spotify. Check it out. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Follow me on X, @Nature'sEpion. Cheers.